All right, so aesthetics of Urbit. And really you can break down most Urbit aesthetics into three categories. What is an Urbit? What is my Urbit? And what is our Urbit? What is an Urbit? You're trying to figure out what this Martian alien thing is. What does it do? What does it mean? If you think of it in a Platonic sense, does it have a color? Can it have a color? Does it have angles or edges? Is it a weird texture? What is my Urbit? What'll make this Urbit unique to me? How am I tying this Urbit into my identity? You've already heard me referred to as Nart, and that's part of my identity. My Urbit is part of my identity at this point. And how does this Urbit affect my perception of self when our entire world is getting more and more digital? And finally, what is our Urbit? What sort of community can I have on Urbit? What sort of tribe can I organize? How does community work? How can I relate to others through text, through video, through images, through shared links? And who am I going to find common ground with on Urbit? Who can I identify with? What visually on Urbit can signal that we have that shared community and that shared common ground? And these are all going to be examples of art from the community through pretty much this entire presentation. I'll try and call out the creators at the end, but some of these have been floating around for a while, so my sincere apologies if I don't get to all of them. We'll start off with an Urbit, and you get a lot of explanation of what an Urbit is in the Urbit design documentation and in your sort of first walkthrough of Urbit on urbit.org. You hear a lot of things like a clean slate for the 21st century. You hear that's a sort of a 1968 Porsche, that it brings calm computing. I think visually, this artwork by Litmus Written really captures what it is. It's simple. It's something that you could theoretically hold in your hand. It contains any number of colors. It can be anything. It's whatever you make of it. It's calm, it's relaxing. For me, the first moment where I could identify what an Urbit really was when I heard that Porsche metaphor. I could tell maybe what it might not be, but negative definitions can be limited almost by design. And that particularly was striking for me because I'm pretty sure I've never seen a Porsche in person older than 2005, but it's still such a powerful metaphor that you can have in your head, that you can just recognize that it's something simple. It's something straightforward that you can take apart and rebuild and comprehend. It isn't just that abstract or the lack of a sigil in this artwork. And it's not the focus on just my Urbit or our Urbit. It's Urbit in the greater sense. Give It a Second, which is this piece on the far right here by Minder Folden, is probably my favorite example of the aesthetic of Urbit as such. It's calm, it's patient. There's no sense of the modern digital urgency, the sort of feeling that you're sitting at a slot machine in a casino where everything's trying to sell you ads. Urbit isn't about that. Urbit's about being patient, being calm, stepping back for a bit and letting the system take its time to do things properly. But it's still pretty quick, and it'll still get the job done. You can always rely on it to get the job done every time. And there's a lot of artwork here that I wasn't able to include that also gets into some of the Hoon paradigms and some stuff like gates and heads and tails that I unfortunately wasn't able to include. But I will plug the Aesthetic Culture Digest that I release every month or two as a great example of a place where you can find stuff like that. And I'll provide information on that either at the end of the talk or when we're doing questions and answers type stuff. Ultimately, though, an Urbit can do a lot, but without its pilot and without its community, it's kind of still just a computer, a really cool computer, but still a computer. And that's where we get into my Urbit. And primarily the stuff that you see surrounding my Urbit, in the sense that an Urbit that belongs to a single person, primarily that's around planetary sigils, because that's our main way of relating to ourselves on Urbit. Generally, though, it can be anything that takes that Platonic ideal of an Urbit, that form, and uses, for example, a bucket fill tool to paint the Urbit in your favorite shade of green. And while the idea of having understandable, simple and stylish OS that I can understand in its entirety is what got me kind of interested in the project in general, what kept me here was the idea of building a proper home in digital space, and one that's kind of without gimmick. You can say that a home can be done in VR or in Minecraft, but it's limited and it doesn't feel as natural as an Urbit does. It doesn't feel like it's an extension of your body, something that's as versatile as a living thing. And it doesn't feel like home in the way that Urbit does. My Urbit is a way to identify, express, change, communicate, authenticate, and explore, and record. Of course, it follows naturally that people would be proud of them. There's been instances of Urbits as graffiti that I will neither confirm nor deny any allegations of. People make physical versions of them all the time. If you can see behind me here, I've got a physical version of the flag of my star that just showed up this morning. We also have these wonderful bronze sigils that are still in progress on the far right here. Pop Rocks made a sort of light up Urbit. There's the Urbit cards effort that nartes-fasrum has been working on. There's any number of different ways that people have been investing time to physically sort of bring their Urbit into existence. And that's cool because it's also a great way to lure people into the network. It shows them that there's something so worth investing time on and so distinct that people will not only make digital art around it, but they'll be willing to sacrifice physical things to make physical art around it. And it's also really recognizable. The second you see a sigil, you know that's Urbit. It's a very good shelling point. It's just this bat signal of, hey, Urbit, right? And you can identify communities pretty quickly by the sigil of their host. And that's where we move into our Urbit a bit more. And I think this image by, if I remember right, Naltic Warness, and I know it's a Das Web Industries promotion image, this really captures the sense of our Urbit. It's a community of all these different things that come together and coexist and cooperate. Some of them are kind of on their own, doing their own thing, and we may never know about them. We may never know how big they get. Other ones interact with everybody else on the network. There's other people on the same trail of our digital homestead metaphor. This community of other homesteaders is what's building this aesthetic. Humans naturally want to be able to contribute to something. They want to be able to organize around something. And with these really strong identifiers of allegiance, these really strong shelling points that Urbit provides in the form of a sigil, it's very easy to do so. You can say definitively that if someone shows an Urbit-related thing without explicitly expressing that it's Urbit, that person probably knows what Urbit is, and that you can start up a conversation with them based on Urbit. And there's a lot of really fantastic art that comes out around communities, and I think community art is something that's only going to get more and more interesting and more popular as time goes on, especially because of this sense that Urbit is speedrunning the internet. You start hearing that a lot more often now, and the strongest argument for that is this art. I'd say that a lot of the art that's out there around Urbit communities outshines the sort of thing that you'd find on Reddit or on Twitter, the sort of places that you don't have a connection to the community because you can get banned like that in an instant. On Urbit, your community is with you, your data is with you. You own that. That's your home digitally. Art styles in a lot of different cases can be unique to an Urbit community, but there's some common trends and common threads, even if not all at once. A lot of them tend to use that sort of minimal sans serif font in a lot of places. There's like focus on simplicity, on using strong color metaphors, but you can still see a unique style and a unique trend in each image. For example, with the sort of thing that comes out of the DASFEB small computers group, you can pretty much always bet that there's going to be something about small computers in it, that there's going to be a Raspberry Pi logo hanging out somewhere, that sort of thing. Litmus Written's art style is instantly recognizable. Anytime I see Urbit 10 pop up, it just kind of brings a smile to my face, and I go, oh yeah, that's Litmus's work. And while you can see the similarities between the two, they're still very distinctive in style, and they still have their own feel to them. They've evolved in parallel, but they're still certainly unique. And of course, community art is typically focused around evangelizing a given community or acting as a recruitment poster of sorts. You'll often see, such as in the example of the Frank Herbert's Hoon image on the top right, a link to join the community, or in the Sitbus Dapsup Australia group. It's featured pretty prominently there. Sometimes you'll be able to find out what the group is based off of the poster. Sometimes they leave it to be somewhat of an enigma. In the case of Love Crypt, you don't really know what that group is about unless you know what Love Crypt is. It's a record label, and this is the group on Urbit for discussion of the Love Crypt label and that sort of thing. Australia, you can look at and go, oh yeah, that's probably for Australians. Of course, all this begs the question, why? How did it become this good this quick when we went from a couple of years ago a command line interface to now we have this huge explosion, this almost like Cambrian explosion of art and of interfaces and of sigils. And I think that's because Urbit has a near perfect blend of passion, skill, and freedom. I've tried to illustrate this on the right, but the metaphor doesn't quite come through. It's not that Urbit is lacking in any of the three. It balances the three beautifully. Urbit art is great for evangelizing and expressing your passion about the project because it's good. It's instantly recognizable. If you're in the know, you know. Urbit's free in multiple senses. Maybe not for pay, but you're free to change how your Urbit looks if you can talk to it. You're free to use your Urbit ID or your sigil to further identify yourself however you want. And there's something personal to it. There's a sense that that sigil is both timeless and relevant in the current time. It's not like an Xbox 360 character or one of those gravatars that gets generated on WordPress. It's something that you can feel very personal for. And I think that's one of the reasons that I included this mixture of work between DASFEB and Tokrex Holpen. Tokrex has been doing drawings for the past, I want to say for the past year of different Urbit galaxies, but recently has expanded into doing commissions of different Urbit stars and Urbit planets. And the instance that's displayed here is the DASFEB star working on a small computer. And the fact that anyone can identify themselves as that, and that someone's willing to draw something that's obviously good, that speaks more to the passion, the skill, and the freedom of Urbit, I think, than I could ever say in a presentation. Being able to see that sort of thing and see that drive that people have with Urbit, the energy that people are willing to expend on Urbit, I think that's one of the best ways to bring people in and evangelize people and get people further excited about the project. In closing, I'd like to thank especially all the people who've had their work featured in this presentation in the Aesthetic Culture Digests, all the people who post in Art by Urbit and Network Subject. I'd especially like to thank our host, Haktup Labtel. My apologies if I pronounced that unconventionally. It's very fascinating and very interesting to go through all these things and learn so much about a community that's just getting off the ground and watch it sort of work through all these different things as it grows. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have.